Okay. My name is Kaare Press-Kristensen. I'm educated as an engineer with a Ph.D. from the Technical University of Denmark, where I've been teaching air pollution now for 20 years. I have a M.Sc from the Danish Business School. The good thing about this combination is that I'm turning around doing air quality measurements and traditional engineering reports. And then I combine this with health issues and economical impact of these health issues to learn politicians that it's actually a very good investment to reduce air pollution and thereby improve public health. Ultrafine particles are some of the smallest particles we know, and they are extremely important because they penetrate deeply into the lungs and are transferred to the blood. Furthermore, they can penetrate directly into the brain. So they are extremely important when we talk public health. Ultrafine particles, they are produced in combustion processes. It can be a ship engine, it can be a diesel engine and so on, and thereby they are emitted through the exhaust pipe to the air, and then we inhale them. In a port city like Rotterdam, there are of course lots of ships, and they emit high concentrations of ultrafine exhaust particles because there are no particulate filters on ships. Ultrafine particles, they contribute both to cancer, they contribute to cardiovascular diseases and strokes, and they increase the risk of getting a serious airway disease. And if you already have a serious airway disease, there's a higher chance of an attack, for example, an asthma attack. In relation to morbidity and mortality, we don't have that much research on ultrafine particles as we have on other particles, because at first here in newer times we've been able to measure ultrafine particles. But what we know is that they seem to be at least as toxic as other particles, because they're this dangerous cocktail of very small size, allowing them to reach the finest parts of the lungs, and having a composition of PAHs, of soot and heavy metals, so they're both toxic and reach the finest parts of the lungs and are transferred to the blood and can thereby reach all sensitive areas in the human body. So from a toxicological point of view, they should be at least as toxic as all other particles we know. We need to measure ultrafine particles to get more knowledge on the concentrations, so we can use this knowledge to get a perfect dose-response relationship. That meaning pointing out exactly how toxic are these particles. They could be much more toxic than other particles due to this specific cocktail of a small size and a toxic composition, thereby allowing all these toxic chemicals to be transported to the most sensitive parts of the lungs. We don't have the final toxicological evidence for that yet, because we have too few measurements of the ultrafine particles. But all the experiments we do, where we take young, healthy students and expose them to toxic ultrafine particles, we see oxidative stress in the lungs, we see inflammation, so we see all these effects that lead to cardiovascular diseases, to serious airway diseases. So from the experiments we have, they look at least as toxic as other particles. But we should do more measurements to map the pollution, to do better dose-response relationships and do impact assessments. The best way when you want to measure ultrafine particles is of course to have the right equipment. Here the P-track is a very simple equipment. It has been used for decades. It's simple to use, it's reliable, it's quite handy, you can move around with it. And it's quite, when you do the measurements, the data treatment, data gets out, they can be used both in scientific articles, and they can be used in citizen science projects, and just to illustrate different pollution levels. You can compare the road traffic and shipping traffic. You can compare pollution in different places in the city. So it's really a great hands-on tool. It's always a great idea, if you have good measurements, you have a cruise ship, you can see very high pollution levels, then it's a great idea to invite the press for the measurements, to show them pollution, and maybe compare the pollution close to a street with heavy traffic or in a park, and then show how much the cruise ship actually increases the pollution compared to other places. Another angle is, of course, to do simple scientific reports, where you highlight all your measurements, you put in good pictures, maybe links to small videos to make it more real, and then you send these videos to the press. That's another great angle. And then of course you can make different highlights when you have the first cruise of the year, the largest cruise of the year, or the last cruise. There's always some kind of media hook to again highlight the pollution. But not only cruise ships pollute, of course ferries pollute a lot. They have frequent arrivals and departures. They maybe stay overnight idle running in the port. This pollution should be highlighted as well. Typically it's national companies owning these ferries, and that's always a good angle as well in the press. And then we have all the small boats, of course, having a pollution as well, but it's to a minor degree. NO2 is a harmful gas that affects our airways, and especially people that already have airway diseases like asthma and bronchitis. They are very sensitive, but the rest of us as well, we're sensitive as well, and increase our risk of cardiovascular diseases. So it's a health issue, and it should be avoided. It is emitted from incineration processes at high temperatures like diesel engines or ship engines. NO2 is a key issue when you have a port, because in ports you have lots of ship engines, and ship engines do not have a catalytic converter, so they do not remove the NO2, they just emit it. Whereas diesel engines, road vessels, they have a catalytic converter, removing around 80% of the NOx. So of course in a port city you will have key sources for NO2, and that is huge point sources like huge ships, for example cruise ships or ferries. NO2 both affect public health, because it increases the risk of cardiovascular diseases and serious airway diseases, but it affects the environment as well. It contributes actually to acid rain and to over-fertilization. So you get eutrophication as well of aquatic ecosystems. So it's something we need to remove at the source by catalytic converters. NO2, you can measure that either at a point source if you want to go for peak levels, but usually we want to measure it over a much longer period. So you need passive measurements, and you do that by a small measuring container with tubes recording the average pollution levels over a month, and then you replace them month after month, send them to the lab, and they calculate backwards, and you get the average concentration at the point of measurements. And do that over half a year, summer and winter period, then you get a quite good approximation of the average concentration. And it should be above 10 micrograms per cubic meter here in the European Union. When we talk media attention, NO2 tubes are quite good because you measure for a very long period, and it's thereby easier to compare measurements with other ports. So you could more or less make a competition between different ports. Of course, it's very important where you put the NO2 devices in the different ports. It should be comparable positions in the different ports. But that's the possibility there, because you measure for a long period, so it's easier to compare something than point measurements taken by the P-tracks. So that's maybe a specific media possibility when we talk NO2 measurements. And else there's the same as when you have the P-track. You can see, are you above the 10 micrograms per cubic centimeter or not? If you are, theoretically the city should take action. So you can kind of promote action that way compared to the official air quality guideline value. P-tracks are good for point measurements, so measurements over a short time, half a day or a full day, to see how much does a cruise ship pollute here and now. You can point out the pollution source when you use a P-track. You're there, you can take photos and videos. You know the pollution source, and you can see how much extra pollution it adds. When you use NO2, it's average pollution levels. You don't know the specific source. The tubes are there, measuring by themselves for a month. You're not there, so you don't know what's caused the pollution, but you know the average pollution at that spot during the last months. And they supplement each other, because you can use the P-track to find the polluted spots, and that's then where you put your NO2 measurements. The limit value should be fulfilled at the most polluted spot. So by using the P-track, you can find the most polluted spots, and then you can measure NO2 on these spots. So they supplement each other, these two measurements. When we talk limit value for NO2 on 10 micrograms per cubic meter, it seems that the health effects below that level is only for people already suffering from an airway disease. Healthy people should not be hit by health consequences below that level. With the knowledge we have now, it develops all the time. On the other hand, when we talk ultrafine particles or particle pollution, there is no lower level, there is no safe level. It's like tobacco smoking. You cannot say if you just smoke below 2 or 3 cigarettes a day, there's no health risk. There's always a health risk with particle pollution. The only safe level is 0. When you measure NO2, usually you measure it several places at the same time. So if you have an area around a ferry terminal, you might put up 5 or 6 measuring boxes there, and then you get a good impression of the NO2 pollution in that area. So you take a similar ferry terminal in another city, and you do the same. Furthermore, you can make some background port pollution levels where you put measuring boxes, not on the hotspots, but more away from the hotspot, say what are the general air pollution in this area, and do the same in other ports. And then you can compare these and see, are some ports significantly higher than other ports? And does that correlate, for example, with more ferries or more frequent arrivals and departures, or more cruise liners, or what can be the knowledge behind? And of course, you could put NO2 boxes in smaller ports where you have no ferries and no cruise ships, and then you can see what the level is there, or outside ports in the nature close to the coast, and you will have a baseline if you had no local pollution sources in the cities. The authorities, they measure air pollution in larger port cities, but they do way too few measurements. And the measuring stations, they are placed close to road traffic, because in the old days, road traffic was really the key source to air pollution. Now we have catalytic converters and particulate filters on road traffic, but the measuring stations are still close to streets. They have not been moved because they want to continue the historical data series. We can understand that, but that means that we have no measurements close to shipping lanes when you have port cities, no measurements close to ferry terminals or cruise ports where people live. Because in many port cities, residential areas and shipping is kind of integrated into each other, and there are no measuring stations there. So we need to do the job ourselves to get the attention of the politicians and the authorities, and then hope that they will put official measuring station close to the ports. It's actually recommended in new air quality directive, but you don't need to do it, it's not mandatory. But let's make these measurements, make the authorities and the politicians aware of these challenges related to shipping, and then hope they will take action.